Welcome to the Office of the New South Wales Anti-Slavery Commissioner's how-to video on how to use and navigate version 2 of the Inherent Risk Identification Tool, or IRIT, released in May 2025. The Office of the New South Wales Anti-Slavery Commissioner acknowledges that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples are the first peoples and traditional custodians of Australia and the oldest continuing culture in human history. First Nations people have survived practices that today we call modern slavery and continue to live with its legacy. Artwork titled Creation is by Uncle Richard Campbell from the Kinchela Boys Home Aboriginal Corporation. Inherent risk is a risk present in the absence of controls or risk mitigation efforts. The IRIT maps risk to help covered entities identify inherent modern slavery risks in the categories of products and services they may procure, enabling them to take reasonable steps and to meet their due diligence reporting requirements. Developed as part of the Commissioner's Shared Implementation Framework and GRS, it provides a common baseline of risk for New South Wales buyers. The IRIT uses the New South Wales Government Whole-of-Government Spend Cube taxonomy in use in 2024. The tool uses publicly available information from reliable sources to highlight modern slavery risk factors across a wide range of products and services. Features of the Inherent Risk Identification Tool. The IRIT consists of 6 main sections. The Guidance section provides context, orientation, and key steps for using the tool. The Inherent Risk Identification section lists level 1 to 3 categories along with their assigned level of risk, risk factors, and any related procurement category intersections. The Risk Factors section provides descriptions for each aspect of risk factored into the inherent modern slavery risk level. These will be discussed in detail shortly. The Procurement Categories Index shows level 3 categories used in the IRIT. For covered entities that don't use the Spend Cube taxonomy, the definitions in this section will need to be used to identify relevant categories. The IRIT uses a consolidated library of standardized risk assessments for general classes of products and services. These can be searched using Risk Assessments and Commentaries tab. Where an assessment exists for a category, users can click on the link in the Inherent Modern Slavery Risk Identification tab to navigate to its risk assessment. These sections include the standardized risk assessment, additional relevant information, and the evidence used to assign the risk level. Inherent modern slavery risk is assessed against 4 risk factors. An authority determination of whether the product is found to in fact be made with modern slavery based on a determination by the New South Wales Anti-Slavery Commissioner or a reliable government or intergovernmental body. The risk factor applies to the procured product itself rather than upstream inputs or other value chain risks. For example, raw material inputs for concrete may carry risk, but if these are not being purchased directly, this risk factor would not be triggered. The vulnerable populations risk factor is triggered when a product or service relies heavily on vulnerable groups such as migrant workers, temporary visa holders, ethnic minorities, women, children, and young people. These groups are more likely to be exposed to harm and often unable to enforce their rights in exploitative situations. The supply chain model risk factor is triggered when the supply chain significantly increases the risk of modern slavery. Examples include extensive subcontracting, labour hire agreements, limited worker rights and representation, and high rates of employee turnover. The regulatory context risk factor is triggered when a product or service comes from areas where laws and regulations are not strong enough to prevent exploitation and abuse of workers. Examples include high risk of bribery or corruption linked to modern slavery, barriers to effective auditing and corporate reporting, and restrictions on free association, organisation, and expression. Risk factors are assigned a weighting which is used to calculate the level of risk for a procurement category. Authoritative determinations are assigned a weighted score of 3, with vulnerable populations, supply chain model, and regulatory context each assigned a weighted score of 1. When a risk factor is present for a category, it contributes to its cumulative risk score, and these scores determine the level of risk. A high risk level has a cumulative weighted score of 3 to 6. A moderate risk level has a cumulative weighted score of 2. A low risk level has a cumulative weighted score of 1. And when no modern slavery risk has been identified through quantitative research, a risk level of minor is assigned. Procurement categories can share risk because they have similar features or include the same products, components, or services. Where this occurs, procurement category intersections have been highlighted. In this example, an intersection has been identified on the Inherent Risk Identification sheet. In the risk assessment, links have been provided to the intersecting categories, and additional commentary has also been added. If procurement categories overlap, due diligence should include modern slavery risks from the related category. The IRIT is designed to be used in conjunction with the Commissioner's Guidance on Reasonable Steps, or GRS. The tool helps identify the level of inherent modern slavery risk associated with procurement activities. However, simply checking the inherent modern slavery risk of a product or service for a procurement is not considered reasonable due diligence steps on its own. Rather, the identified risk level combined with the entity's capability for that specific procurement will determine the level of due diligence required. Further guidance on due diligence requirements and how to prioritise risk to people can be found in the GRS, GRS resources, and all e-learning modules via the Comperio platform. Navigating the Inherent Risk Identification Sheet. The Inherent Risk Identification Sheet is marked in green in the tool and should be the starting point when assessing the inherent modern slavery risk of a procurement. Procurement categories shown from level 1 to 3 have been assigned an identifier. The inherent modern slavery risk for each category at level 3 is shown in column H, and the risk factors triggered to calculate the cumulative risk score and any identified procurement category intersections are shown in columns I to M. Most categories in the taxonomy have been given an initial assessment by the Commissioner's Office and found to carry only a minor modern slavery risk. These categories are marked as initial assessment only in column B. A subset of categories have been identified as more likely to involve modern slavery risk, and further research has been carried out to complete a full assessment. For categories that have been fully assessed, click the Link to Assessment link in column B to review the full risk assessment. Navigating the risk assessment sheets. At the top of the sheet, you'll find navigation guides with additional information for each section. To navigate back to the Inherent Risk Identification sheet, click the Back to IRIT list button at the top of the sheet. The first section shows information about the Level 3 procurement category, any procurement category intersections, and Level 4 procurement categories are also displayed, but only to provide additional context. The next section outlines the risk level, triggered risk factors, weightings, and commentary. The commentary provides a detailed explanation of why particular risk factors were triggered. The third section shows any authority determinations by good or goods and country. The type of good listed and any confirmed occurrence of child or forced labour is marked with a yes. Import data is also included for the top 90% of imports reported by Australia. If a country is listed and the forced and child labour columns are blank, it means no risk has been identified. In these cases, the countries are shown only to support the import data, not because an authority determination has been made. Further sections to the right show the sources, links, and key information used to support the risk level and commentary provided for vulnerable populations, supply chain model, and regulatory context. Navigating the risk assessment sheets for the construction sector. More complex construction categories will require an additional assessment to determine the inherent modern slavery risk level. These will be shown on the Inherent Risk Identification sheet as further assessment required. The first section shows information about the Level 3 procurement category, including procurement category intersections. However, the next section shows commentary only. The third section will show a list of risk assessments that may form part of the procurement. To complete the assessment, click on the link under the Risk Assessment heading. This will link to a web-based PDF resource that supplements the IRIT, allowing buyers to select the specific construction services materials included in a procurement to produce an overall risk assessment. You can also access on the Commissioner's Due Diligence and Reporting page under GRS Resources. The first page of the form contains a list of risk assessments. Select yes or no if that product or service will form part of the procurement. At the bottom of the form, a risk level will be calculated. This will be the level of risk for this procurement. Subsequent pages of the document provides further information for each risk assessment. For any risk assessment marked as yes, the relevant IRIT category must be reviewed and factored into any due diligence steps. This video is produced by the University of Sydney in collaboration with the Office of the New South Wales Anti-Slavery Commissioner. For more information, please contact the Office of the New South Wales Anti-Slavery Commissioner or feel free to pause the video and scan these QR codes.